Hey everybody, it's the Salt City Hoops podcast, and once again, look, there are three of us, three dudes here to talk about the Utah Jazz once again, from three different climes, three different states, and only two of us are related. Although Mark, I have a running joke that Mark kind of vaguely reminds me of a cousin of ours, but we've got a couple of Claytons and a Pereira. I'm Dan Clayton, managing editor of SaltCityHoops.com. Over there in balmy Phoenix, Arizona, is Ken Clayton, also SaltCityHoops.com. Ken, welcome.
Howdy.
And down there, well, I don't know where you're at on the screen of the viewers, but you're down on my screen over in lovely Denver, Colorado, frigid Denver, Colorado, mile high Denver, Colorado. How's Mark Pereira doing tonight?
Look, it's nearly as warm as Phoenix these days. We had a below freezing for one day, and it's just been in the 50s like all of January and December. So as someone who prefers that, I'm going to ignore the broader environmental issues associated with that and just be happy.
There you go. So we have a lot to talk about in this episode. We decided to get together because the trade deadline is approaching. February 5th is the NBA's trade deadline, and we're going to talk about kind of some dream scenarios and buyer scenarios for the Jazz, seller scenarios for the Jazz. Before we do that, before we get all the way into trade talk, it's been an interesting week of extremes for the Utah Jazz, who suffer their worst by point margin, at least by scoring margin. I don't know. I have felt worse after other Jazz games in recent memory, but at least by point margin, their worst loss since 1979, their worst home loss ever. And then the very next night they go and they beat a team that is, supposed to be title contending. We can debate whether or not they are title contending in a game that really wasn't even like super duper in doubt down the stretch. I think as close as it got was 7 in the early fourth quarter. And then the Jazz had another little mini run and it was never closer than like double digits. So just what a weird week. And I don't know if we want to spend 5 minutes talking about the weirdness that was that, 30 hours in Jazz Nation. Wait, it wasn't a back-to-back. So, whatever. 48 hours, 50 hours in Jazz Nation before we dive into trade talk. Just a weird couple of games, fellas.
Yeah, it was definitely nothing that I would have predicted on probably either game individually, but certainly collectively. Nobody looks at the home game at Charlotte and thinks, I mean, even with, we all know what the injury report looked like on that game. Even with that, nobody would have predicted a 55-point blowout and just a miserable performance from the first, right from the opening tip. And then to go turn it around with getting a bunch of good guys back, veteran starter type guys. And really, I guess I'm mostly just talking about Lowry and Nurk, because Svi did not play last night, did he?
Svi played.
Did he play?
Svi
okay.
Played. Svi played in Cleveland.
That's right. He started, along with Cody and Keontae. Okay. So you get back those three guys who are, maybe not league-wide starter quality, but they're certainly veteran starters that the Jazz frequently use. Even then, I didn't think they would go out and handle Cleveland, despite Cleveland's struggles, and they did. They handled them pretty well most of the game. There was a little bit where Cleveland looked like they might come back and take control, but with a massive game by Keontae George and pretty good game from Lowry Markkanen as well, it was all Jazz in the fourth quarter.
Yeah, the return of the veterans, much to the chagrin of many in Jazz Nation. The fact that you're questioning whether Svi Mykhailiuk is playing or not. Yeah, it's not that he had a forgettable game. He had a nice little moment in the third or fourth quarter there with the back-to-back threes. But it was a lot of Jazz Nation is like, I do not want to see minutes from Svi Mykhailiuk. I'm sick of Dan, Mark, and Ken telling me about why it's valuable for Svi Mykhailiuk to be out there. And you get 18 minutes from Kevin Love, you get obviously the 30 minutes from Nurkic, and you end up with DMP coaches' decisions from Walt Clayton Jr. and Taylor Hendricks. And Hendricks hasn't been good, so you kind of like, like to see him out there for a variety of reasons, but I'm not exactly hurt by that. But Clayton had been closing every single game. And the rotation was funky, as I mentioned this on the last show. Like, he wasn't even coming in until the second quarter, which was weird. But then he was closing all these games and playing acceptable rookie point guard stuff. So to have him not play at all, and then you kind of look at the rotation and say, well, like for whom instead, right? And then because the backcourt is already young, you have a return of Ace Bailey who is only in there for 15 minutes. So I think this will start to
But closed.
yeah, and very well too, and was rewarded. And it's every time we kind of have chagrin over the rotation a little bit, it's guys do get rewarded for playing well, and I think the Jazz are quote unquote resting guys at a very high rate to not be so mad that hey, we're gonna go into on the road to one of the very best teams in the NBA who their record doesn't show it, but they have all their healthy guys. They have Mobley. They have Garland, who's been playing well since he's been back for an injury. He's barely played this year. We know what Donovan Mitchell can do. Jalen Tyson's come out of nowhere and been great. And any other guy who is hurt for Cleveland is a bit player like Dean Wade or Lonzo Ball. All right, this is a development day for everyone who's good, right? And they won. Great. That's such a good thing for everyone. And it's if you can mix it with 55-point losses to Charlotte, I'm going to zoom out way more and say that these wins over San Antonio and such are like, wow, those are rare and weird and more of an anomaly than something to be expected about. So I share the frustration. This is the last thing I'll say. I share the frustration that Clayton didn't play and maybe a little bit Hendricks too. I don't know what they would have done, should have done otherwise, other than resting Svi Mikhailiuk seems like not like a productive. Seems like an odd decision to make. Like, oh, this random player who played 26 minutes is the reason that these guys didn't play. Like, you're pointing out specifics that don't really seem to make sense. And the team desperately needs Kevin Love to provide because no one else can play center, and you can't just throw Kaylor Hendricks out there and it'll hurt Hendricks' development too if he's playing something that he can't do. Yeah. So
Hendricks is not a center, and I wish Jazz fans would just kind of let that idea go for now.
At least for now.
Didn't mean to take your thunder away.
No,
at least for now.
And watching, it was the Cleveland often plays at 5 p.m. Mountain, right? So I've watched a lot of Cleveland ex post. And this is maybe the 7 or 8 or 9 times I've been able to see them live from the jump. And Evan Mobley's a shell of himself, and I really think the Jazz put him completely out of his element. And a lot of credit goes to a lot of the Jazz youth who are doing a lot of cool things. Again, especially Ace Bailey in the second half there. So we go into a much more critical tank watch perspective this weekend with a pair of Dallas Mavericks games, which the Jazz will lose one of them. They will absolutely lose one of them, no holds barred.
Yeah, so a couple things, and then we can move off of the Charlotte-Cleveland weirdness. For one thing, last night was the 12th time this season that Donovan Mitchell, Darius Garland, Evan Mobley, and Jared Allen all appeared in a game together. So, their record is funky for a reason. In the same breath, they're now 6-6 when those 4 guys do play. So, I'm not sure quite how to categorize Cleveland. That doesn't really matter to us. That's not the purpose of this podcast. I think they were flat last night. I think the Jazz had a good game plan. The Jazz knew how they wanted to attack on both ends, and they did so for the most part, other than, again, there was that second quarter where Cleveland did go up by as many as 10. Zooming out to the whole tank watch perspective and the almost nightly debate on are the Jazz winning too much? Or they hurt it? Do they even know the plan? Like all of that, even with this win, even with the San Antonio, Detroit surprise wins, like even with all of that, the Utah Jazz are 4-10 in their last 14 games. I remain not worried at all that people don't understand the assignment. They're just not going to lose all the games. Like they're going to win some games here and there. Funny enough, I said back in November and December, I could show you the tweet. I said back in November and December that I thought the Jazz would reach the halfway point with 14 or 15 wins. Right now they're 14-29 with 2 games left before the midway point. And then that I think the second half of the season will look different. I'm just not that concerned. Obviously, someone said, well, obviously they're too good when Keontae George and Lauri Markkanen play. Well, buddy, they're 10 and 18 when those two guys play. So, like, no matter how you slice it, this is still a team that has the ability to finish in the mid 20s for win totals. I'm not concerned about the quote unquote winning too much narrative. But yeah, if you told me going into this week that the Jazz were going to get waxed by 55 in one of those games and win by a dozen in the other one, I might have guessed the other way.
The last thing I'll say on Tank Watch is I'm always surprised when Zach Lowe asks a question of a player or a coach that I think is like only Zach Lowe can ask it because of his place in the media industry. And for him to straight up ask Keontae George in their 30-minute, 25-minute interview, which I encourage everyone to listen to, it's one of the better player interviews I think he's done. I think it's one of the better player interviews Keontae's done on his limited kind of media stuff over the years. He came across so well. He really came into his groove halfway through the interview. But like Zach Lowe asked him, he's like, hey, so you guys owe this pick. You guys talk about that ever? And Keontae, his very first thing of it is like, yeah, we know about it. We know, and we know what the business. We know the business side of basketball, and I thought that was really. And then he finished out with an answer of like, "Whoever's out there, we're going to try our hardest to win the game because we're competitors." That this type of thing you hear. You rarely hear a player actually acknowledge that we know the business direction that's going to happen here. And the reason I found it notable is I feel like, unlike prior seasons, a lot of Jazz players' feelings won't be quite so hurt if they get to February, March, and April and tank their asses off. If they've gotten to a point where everyone can feel proud of the season that they had up to that point and say like, well, the business side of basketball, we're not making the playoffs. Everyone just like focus on our development, in these next couple months, and no one will feel like the season was a failure. And in contrast, I think a lot of players would really feel sad and beaten down and mistrusting of an organization that just said, everyone's resting, we're not trying anymore. And it was interesting for him to acknowledge that.
Agreed. Well, yeah, we can park that there for now. I know we've done nothing but have tank debates all year, and I even think the phrase itself is confusing because I don't think everybody has the same internal definition. So when they hear that word, it means a different thing sometimes to the listener than the speaker meant. And I think you're 100% right. No players. The players, Bryce Sensabaugh is not motivated to go out there and play so poorly that someone will come in and render him replaceable. Like, Bryce Sensabaugh is worried about his second NBA contract. And, Svi Mikhailuk is worried about staying in the league. And, there's no... So anyway, we've done that conversation. I'm sure we'll do that conversation more. Ken, I say you're reaching for the microphone. Anything you wanted to add to that, or should we just go headlong into trade talk?
Nope, I'm good. Let's dive in.
Let's have the fun.
Right. Okay. So the fun. So I guess let's start here. There are a few things. There are a few ways the Jazz could approach this deadline, and I don't think they're mutually exclusive. The Jazz will go in with a lot of different scenarios on the table. They'll discuss options as they come up. And I think, the oversimplified way of putting it is they could be buyers or sellers. But there's even, I think, some gradations in between there. We were talking before we hit record on this pod, we were talking off the air amid some enthralling talk of names like Rondé Hollis Jefferson and Trevor Booker. We were mentioning
not
that,
trade candidates for this deadline.
Not trade candidates, exactly.
Yeah.
Just we can't help ourselves because we're geeks. No, we were talking about the fact that like the Jazz have done like the, sell on Ochai Agbaji in the middle of his rookie contract kind of thing. So even being, quote unquote buyers or sellers could look like some different things. I don't know. In my mind, and this is kind of an educated guess. I mean, obviously we've all heard different things and we've talked to people and whatever, but I picture the Jazz's kind of decision tree about should we make this trade, particularly buyer trades, as starting here, does this player change our reality or not? Because if a guy doesn't change your reality, I just don't see why it makes sense. Like a couple of years ago when the Jazz needed a point guard to just steady their thing, I talked to someone with the organization about, like, would you go spend a second round pick on Monte Morris? And they were like, why would we spend anything on someone who's just like there to hold the spot for the next thing? So I do think that buyer trades, they're going to be very selective about what is worth even minor assets. And then seller trades, there's only so much to sell. They've got the 4 non-star veterans, and then they've got young guys who, like we said with Ochai, they probably are at a point with some of these young guys where they might be willing to go, hey, we think we know enough about this player to decide, that we'd rather just generate another swing. We'd rather just generate another attempt at something. So I guess the broader question, we can start with Ken and then go to Mark. Like, what are you mostly, when you're envisioning trade deadline scenarios for the Utah Jazz in 2026, are you mostly focused on, again, I said it was an oversimplification, but let's just do it, buyer trades or seller trades?
Personally, I'm mostly focused on, drum roll please, seller trades. I just think that that's the easiest path, particularly during the season, because they won't have the oodles of cap space that they might have in future transaction windows like this coming off season. So seller trades, with the caveat, I guess 2 caveats I have to expecting seller trades. The first is, last year, on February 1st, I almost would have guaranteed you that they were going to sell one or more of Jordan Clarkson, Colin Sexton, and John Collins. Guess what? None of them moved. Now, those were a little bit different veterans. On the one hand, I think they were a better group of veterans, more talented group of veterans than the current group that could be moved. But on the flip side, they were also much more highly paid. And so there was a harder market for them. If John Collins would have been making last year what Kevin Love makes this year, he's probably gone in a heartbeat, because somebody's going to give you, somebody's going to trade you something for a guy who produces that, who makes $4 million. So this year, you look at Nurkic, I think you said 4, so I don't know if you were not counting Svi or not counting Niang, but I look at Nurkic, Niang, who we haven't even seen play yet, Kevin Love, Svi, and Kyle Anderson.
Yeah, I sort of always forget. I forget Niang exists, although not because I don't think he's a trade candidate. I actually think sneakily he might be like the most enticing to a certain type of team of those 5 guys. So me saying 4 instead of 5 was pure oversight. Niang absolutely should be in this conversation.
Okay, so I just know in some ways I wonder if Svi is fully in this conversation, because I feel like signals we've gotten from the front office is, we like this guy, we only have to pay him $3.8 million next year and $4 million the year after that, and it's all non-guaranteed. So we have every option in the world available to us. He's producing this for barely more than the minimum. At any rate, so 5 guys we're talking about. So these 5 guys, with the exception of Yusuf Nurkic, all make quite a bit less than that crew last year. So there is a lot more optionality. If a team wants to buy a player, whichever player that is, there's not going to be a sticker shock element to any of those guys except maybe Nurk. And the other caveat I have is, what I feel like we saw last year was the Jazz made several trades. They were neither buyer nor seller trades. They were, and I think this was published in the media, if I remember correctly, these were all deals that teams came to them and said, hey, will you take a couple of second round picks for helping us out here? So they weren't buying or selling anything. They did end up keeping the couple of players that were at the end of that string of transactions. KJ Martin was the one, and whoever else survived. What?
No, just KJ. Just KJ.
He was the only one? Okay.
He was the only one who actually played basketball for the Utah Jazz after that.
Yeah. There were just so many names in and out. I thought maybe there was one more without looking.
You're thinking of Jalen Hood Schifino, who they waived.
No, but didn't Didn't Springer play some? Or was he not in? He wasn't in the trades. They
Springer
signed
wasn't a
him.
result. Yeah, yeah.
That's right. They signed him. Okay.
That was a
Um,
conscious choice.
yeah. And yeah, such as it was. So I 100% expect, because they have some avenues to bring in players, even though they're technically over the cap. I 100% expect that some team somewhere will show up on their doorstep, just like last year, and offer them a trade that's neither buying nor selling, and just say, "Would you take this guy?" If they have space to take that guy. So that's, you know, that's another TBD. Right now they do not, but if they open up a roster spot and could do something like that, maybe they do some non-buying, non-selling trades.
And just for everyone's edification, including my own, uh, what exactly is their cap situation right now? Just so we have the numbers in front of us, as far as like, okay, where might we end up?
So they're
The-
operating as a capped out team, because they had to, in order to keep that John Collins salary cap exception alive. So they actually are bound by the same rules for trades as a over the cap team would be bound by, with the other than they still have 18.3 left of the Collins trade exception. But other than that, they're in the realm of, like, if they trade up to 8.27 million, then they can double the salary that they bring back. If they trade up to 33 million, they can take salary plus about 8.5. So they will be trading like an over the cap team. Is that what you were going to say, Ken?
Yeah, I was going to say that, and I was also going to add halfway through the stream, they would have this won't happen, but they have the space to add up to about 43.8 million
Yeah.
and still stay under the tax. They won't add that much. I would be shocked if they added that much, but if they did a bunch of these red paper clip trades and kept building up, and they currently have, just a fully, cap geeks only need to listen to this next 30 seconds. They have almost 4.9 million left of the mid-level exception. They have under a million left of the biannual, so they probably won't really have much way to use that in a trade. They have 3.56 million left of the PJ Tucker traded player exception, and then the 18.3, 18.4 that Dan mentioned from John Collins. And then those, they can actually add on another 250,000 to those. So
Right.
a 3.5 or 3.56, they could go out and get a player making 3.81 in a trade without sending corresponding salary back. So they've got
Right.
all kinds of tools in the toolbox, but that doesn't mean they'll use them all. And then, like I said, they have that space to add upwards of 43 million in, and still be under the tax, which I doubt they would get anywhere near the tax, but they 100% won't go over the tax.
I'm like Yusuf Nurkic alone. Like the trade rules for salary cap but not tax pay, not apron teams are permissive enough that I think the Jazz can figure out it. If there's something that they want to do and they can meet the other team's asking price from an asset standpoint, like you could trade Nurk and bring back a $27.9 million player without including anyone. Like there's ways to get deals done financially.
Right.
Yeah, I was going to say the reason I kind of wanted it spelled out a little bit as we get into specific players and their salaries and what have you is just give an idea that Utah is operating at like an 8 out of 10 or an 8.5 out of 10 flexibility wise. Like if 10 out of 10 is just like you have 60 million in cap space and let's just spend it. That's obviously no team really has that much currently as we're sitting here. But that's more of an off-season thing. But this is a very flexible team, so a lot of the facilitation trades that you refer to tend to need dumping grounds, and dumping grounds have picks attached to them. And unlike the Presti years of when those dumping grounds were attached first-round picks that became all NBA players, I don't think that's actually precisely what happens, but the chain reaction of Presti moves led to what Oklahoma City is. Utah can certainly bring in some stuff alongside with it. So I'm Can I answer the question, Dan? Buying or selling?
Please, please. I'd love to hear your answer.
So I'm buying. I'm buying this trade deadline. And the reason I'm buying is because, uh, for all the reasons Ken mentioned, I think that selling the things that we have is just not a very attractive thing right now. I don't think anyone wants anything to do with Kyle Anderson or George Niang or for anything worth more than a second round draft, a crappy second round draft pick. And if something like that happens, that's great. But I'm not picking up the phone asking teams like, "Hey, who's got a second round draft pick? You get a Kyle Anderson out of it." I think it's going to be it's going to have to require a team coming to Utah and saying, "We need
Yeah.
it. Here's a second," and it happens. So when I think of like selling, every team knows that we have no reason for George Niang and Kyle Anderson on the team. And on the Nurkic and Kevin Love point of things, I don't think Kevin Love has any trade value whatsoever. So there's certainly no value for either side of a transaction there unless Kevin Love asks for a buyout, which stunningly it seems like he's just having a great time. So I don't think he's going to ask for a championship level buyout there. Nurkic is an interesting one because I think there are teams that are, I think he provides enough value on the court for a team to care about. I don't think any team, when I look at all the play-in and playoff teams as we sit there, no team is sitting there being like, well, we really need a 20-minute-a-game center who can't do anything else. And so you're left with other teams in the Jazz tier of the world who are offering a bad second round pick for Yusuf Nurkic because he costs a lot. He costs more money and he's an expiring contract and everything. So then the opportunity cost just becomes, well, we might as well just keep the guy, keep his bird rights, and see if he wants to come back on like a lower backup center role next year, whatever. It's just more useful as for Utah to just keep him around instead of getting a crappy second. Now you combine all three, you find crappy seconds for all those guys. All of a sudden you got 3 second round picks. You add some broth and you got a stew going. Right, and you got 3 second round picks to play around with, and those aren't those aren't useless. But I'm just not looking to do it. And then the young guys, to our detriment, a lot of the young players have not really shown in even like they could be anything. They could even be a new car type of analysis. Cody Williams has shown a little bit of something of late, but maybe Kyle Filipowski is the closest thing to an Ochai Agbaji. He could be something, he could not be something, we'll see, which is just not very inspiring from a, like, let's make a challenge trade with another team. So I think those are the most eligible players for trades. I think if teams do have an optimistic view on Taylor Hendricks or Filipowski or Cody Williams, which I don't understand why they would, but I don't think that Utah's actively trying to sell them because their value is at their lowest point right now. All that to say is now I'm thinking about, well, what could we do? What could we package up some salaries to do? And my favorite idea that I've come up with is that I just don't think Utah's gonna go into the summer with the list of free agents that are out there and have a rotation player who we want to play over our young depth that is good enough to warrant that sort of rotational conflict, who's gonna want to play in Utah just straight up as a free agent with the cap space. So I want to look at the 2027, 2028 crop of free agents and say, can we bring any of those guys who are under contract for next year in-house that we like, who would be comfortable if they're on a bad team right now or whatever, they would be okay with a tank for the end of the year and rest up. And we don't have to give them a free agency pitch this summer. Our pitch to them is that you play a year of Utah Jazz basketball. And we hear about how much everyone loves Will Harden, how much everyone loves playing in like the great environment there, and this team is primed for a jump. Like, get them playing in a positive basketball environment this year. And you have their bird rights, which is already powerful enough for keeping guys' salaries high. Do a pre-agency move. Look for ways to use your cap space this summer that doesn't involve necessarily signing a guy off the street. Do I have some ideas for that? Yeah, I have some loose ideas for how specifically the Jazz could do it, but I think that's the strategy I'm approaching this on, is let's sop up the cap space with a useful player so we can make the playoffs next year.
So I want to get to names because that's juicy and tantalizing and it's where we should go. I also want to I would say that I think maybe we forget like where Ochai Abaji's overall brand value was at the time that the Jazz got an unencumbered, like saying unprotected isn't exactly true because it was guaranteed to be a bad pick by the time it was traded, but it wasn't a conditional pick. Like the Jazz knew they were getting a pick in that trade. And granted, they had to package him with Kelly Olynyk to unlock that pick. But, Ochai Agbaji spent most of his rookie year, spent about 2/3 of his rookie year in the G League, came in, started doing some nice things late in his rookie season. His second season was going okay. He had like 2 hot shooting months, and other than that was kind of struggling, and so people weren't sure what to make of him. And even that version of Och got the Jazz a first. Oversimplifying it because it was him plus Kelly, and they took some salary and they waived some salary and whatever. But that's what I'm saying. Like that's what unlocked a first. So I do think that when you're kind of trading these second draft guys, if the Jazz do decide that it's time to listen to offers on Flip or listen to offers on Bryce Sensabaugh. I'm not saying they should, but I do think that there's an eye of the beholder element there where maybe any of these guys' basketball value in this current moment isn't super high, but I still think that someone out there would go, hey man, we really liked Isaiah Collier in the 2024 draft. If the Jazz are really listening, maybe we should I don't think that when you trade guys like that, I think it's fair to expect that if someone's not going to come up and offer a real something, you're just going to keep seeing what you have in this 22-year-old or 21-year-old. I see nods. So maybe that's all we need to say on that.
It's more that okay, if with Agbaji, it was a little surprising because it was like, all right, we're just punting the first round, punting to getting another first round pick. It's, I think this bridges into my other point that I really wanted to make sure was made about the young players. It's that we are now going to enter into both at the trade line and this offseason where don't get too attached to these young players. We want to see the young players develop as Jazzmen and be like, well, we drafted them and they became great. It's okay if they don't. Does anyone really care about Agbaji anymore? No, you don't. He's a guy. Of course, he hasn't blown up at all. We would certainly have stronger feelings if he was really, really good for Toronto. But I don't have strong feelings about Sensabaugh, Filipowski, and those sorts of players. They've had cool moments. Summer League MVP, that's cool. And Sensabaugh shot 40,000% from 3 last year. Oh, that was pretty cool. But until you do something like that makes me raise my eyebrows for an extended period of time, like we get with Keontae and Ace Bailey, you are a means to an end, and I'm willing to put on my very, I don't want to say offensive, but it's more like my very cold point of view on these players, and it's especially for a locker room that seems to have its stuff together. I think this is a locker room that could tolerate losing Isaiah Collier. Right, even though I would prefer to have Collier around. He seems like a cool guy. He's going to be a good backup point guard. I think this is a locker room that has a lot more stability than it did 2-3 years ago.
Collier, who, by the way, was acquired with that pick that the Jazz got by trading Och. So, that's the point, is just maybe it's a chance to parlay something forward. Did you have something more on that, Kenneth?
No, a minute ago, though, I was going to mention when Mark was talking about Ochai Agbaji, and you don't really care about him at this point. There's a report out this week that Toronto is willing to give him up with a second-round pick just to move him on. Doesn't mean they hate him, but just means they've gotten to the point now where he's blocking somebody else from getting minutes, blocking a roster spot. They're also ready to say, thanks for the memories, and we'll move on.
Well, back to my decision flow chart conversation from the top of this podcast. I said, I think if the Jazz are going to go into a buyer trade, they're going to approach it from a standpoint of does this guy change who we are as a team? And if the answer is no, then why are you giving up stuff? I think to a lesser degree, you're also making that valuation on guys in your program all the time. And I think the reason why they made the Oates trade is because they realized that he was, first of all, he was an awesome kid. They loved him in the locker room. They, awesome dude. But they just realized, like, hey, we have him projecting as someone who is probably like the 9th best player on a title team. Most likely, right? You're forecasting, which means you're thinking probabilistically, and just that's a fungible thing. So if that's his most likely outcome, his most likely projected outcome, then yeah, to Ken's point, then you move off him, because then he's blocking your opportunity to use that roster spot on something else. And so I think it'll be the same. And I don't know. I'm not contending, Mark, with your point that like these guys largely have low value. I think that's probably true, but I think they have low value in basketball terms, and that doesn't mean that there's not a GM out there somewhere who doesn't go. I remember when Jazz people told me, geez, we'd really love to get Denny Avdia because we don't think the Wizards are using him right. And lo and behold, Denny Avdia goes to a new team and he'll almost surely be an all-star next month. Like that's what you're hoping, is that someone has a secret basketball crush on Bryce Sensabaugh or Cody Williams or whoever it is that you've decided, you know what, I think we could turn this into an opportunity.
Allow me to congeal my thoughts. It's not that I think they have low value. I think it's that their value is at their lowest, and I think this management team tends to operate in like the basic rules of asset management is don't trade the guys at their lowest value type of thing. But I think you've helped me move more in a direction though of saying like, well, just because Flip is having a rough shooting month or whatever is like, I think there's a lot of teams that are looking at that they could look at him and what he's done over the past couple of years and say, there's a lot here that we're willing to trade for. He's kind of stuck behind a morass of forwards and centers and what have you. We have more of an opportunity for him to do what he did in the summer league, which is, hey man, we're just going to put the ball in your hands, and because we want that, and we're willing to let it play. And we can't do that in Utah.
I think when you draft a 19, 20, 21-year-old, and when you trade for a 19, 20, 20-year-old, you're grabbing that player because you like the idea of that player, is I guess the broader point I'm making. And I would expound on that, except I think everyone knows what I mean, and we're beating the horse here. And the much sexier conversation we could be having is where you tried to take us, Mark, 5 minutes ago, which is like, what are some things that, like, when we're laying awake at night, staring at our bedroom ceilings going, oh, wouldn't it be cool if the Jazz could get blank? Like, that's kind of what we should be talking about. And, setting aside for a minute the likelihood of, or the conversation about how likely it is that the Jazz do any of these things, Mark encouraged each of the three of us to come to this recording with with some names on, like, whether it's now or this summer or whatever, like, who are the guys who actually do, like, move the Jazz towards something. And I'm excited to get into those names. I think, the names that keep coming up among Jazz fans are like, if you're going to get like a top 50 player via trade, it's going to be because they're a distressed asset for one reason or another, or because the team's short-term, medium-term direction is unclear. So that's why people keep bringing up like Jaren Jackson Jr. and Trey Murphy III. I think those might be a little reachy, like they might become available, but both of those guys are guys that, the Jazz are significantly going to have to reach into their asset chest to get there. I have kind of my next layer down of guys who like aren't quite stars, aren't quite in the all-star conversation, but I think they would move the Jazz forward in a way. And I don't know that they're particularly realistic trade targets either. Where do you want to start? Should we just round robin it, go like one at a time?
Yeah. Ken, get us started on a cool idea.
I want to hear one of your spicy ones you were promising us. So let's start with you.
Okay, all right. So I'm already seeding my own request. Um, so I want RJ Barrett to be a Utah Jazz man, and
Okay.
I think that Toronto's in a situation where they have a lot of they could really change the direction of their team and doing some interesting things. I think they could really use Utah's draft picks that we would trade for RJ Barrett to do more interesting things. They've been rumored as a possible John Morant connection because there was a loose connection to a Trae Young trade discussion, so why not John Morant? And I don't think John Morant has great trade value, but if they start thinking about their backcourt and where Quickly fits into all this, and I don't think Utah is a landing spot for Quickly, but we have no forwards. And RJ Barrett isn't the tallest forward in the world, but he fits a forward creator role that needs a very specific set of circumstances around him to be a successful player that Utah has. He absolutely can be a player that plays alongside Keontae George as I don't mean this denigratingly, but like a your turn, my turn, like who is bringing up the ball and initiating offense type of thing. They both need a player that they play with to maximize what each other does well. RJ Barrett, because he's not a great shooter, he needs shooting around him. And while the Walker Kessler fit would be a little bit interesting, Kessler showed flashes a little bit of being a little bit of a small little spacer, and RJ Barrett has improved a little bit over that time. He's a youngish player. He doesn't make a ton of money. He doesn't make small money, but he makes enough money. He's an unrestricted free agent in 2027, I believe. So he fits exactly what I was saying of like we get another year, bring him in, and the asking price is always a question, right? When we have these discussions, like, am I trying to give him the McCall the McCall Bridges 5 first-round draft picks? Of course not. But if you can say, hey, Toronto has a reason for Kyle Filipowski and a couple firsts for RJ Barrett, I am very interested in bringing RJ Barrett into the shape of this Jazz team, which would look Keontae George, RJ Barrett, Ace Bailey, Lowry Markkanen, and Walker Kessler. I think that's a starting five that wins 40-plus games next year.
He was not on my list.
That's why I'm here.
No, looking at his salary, I mean, I almost think he's lower enough salary. He'd be hard to get because that's a pretty good value for a player like him. 27.7 this year, 29.6 the following year. He also fits just as far as the matching salary that would be required, like Yusuf Nurkic plus the expanded trade exception, and you're there. You'd have to send more than that, of course, but Nurkic would match his salary without including anything else if Toronto was okay with that.
Toronto's also not without a need for a center in general.
No,
I
sure.
think Pirtle has been kind of disappointing for them for injury reasons and performance reasons. Nurkic doesn't solve a lot for them, but if they wanted to be competent in their first round playoff series or the play-in, Nurkic, you could do a lot worse.
Yeah. Yeah. They've been rumored to be going a potential destination for Anthony Davis, who wouldn't probably help him a lot this year, but maybe going forward. But if that fell apart, there's probably something there. It's hard to really, truly ever know what if the Jazz had interest in him back in 2022 in the Donovan Mitchell New York Knicks trade talks. But
what I
he was a name that was being discussed.
Yeah, and the reason I was super not interested at the time is because I didn't think he showed enough in that era to be like, oh, he's going to become a star.
Yeah.
And so I wanted no part of it. Sure enough, he's not a star, and so now I'm seeing him being like, all right, that's a complementary starter piece that makes sense on a playoff team. I'm glad he's not a superstar. I think he becomes more of a player that works well within a team construct for doing what he does, and you can work with his flaws instead of trading for him as a 22-year-old and saying like, well, we hope he's better than he possibly could be. But This is the type of player I'm talking about.
Yeah.
I like, when I do this exercise, I do tend to look for guys who have more years left, just because I do think, it sometimes can take a minute for guys to warm up to the idea of staying in Utah long term. Although RJ Barrett is the one thing I'll say is he is extension eligible. I mean, he's not like literally today, but he's past the point in his contract when he's extendable. They'd have to wait until the summer because you can't extend a non-expiring deal during the season. So maybe if they got the vibes that he would extend cheaply, I'd be more interested. To Ken's point, like he is the second leading scorer on a team that quite surprisingly finds itself currently fourth in the East. So, I don't know what Toronto's competitive ambitions are, but he's been pretty important to a surprisingly good team, and he's on a, I wouldn't say a bargain of a deal, but he's on like a fair deal. Like, the 20s now, it's taking us all some time to mentally adjust to these numbers, but mid to high 20s is now just starter money. Like 25 to 30 million is what your fifth starter will make if he's not on a rookie contract. And that's the era we're operating in.
A couple other details I want to mention about RJ Barrett that to call upon what you're saying is, I did look at a lot of players for the free agent class of 2027 for that extension reason. There is a lot of tampering that happens with these trade deadline discussions, and you could have a discussion with RJ Barrett saying like, "Hey, we're going to give you an extension that is like, would you be up for this trade if we gave you $36 million a year?" Right? And he might say like, "Hey, I would do that if you offer that to me this summer." Yeah. And that's something you can't do with a free agent. Like Utah should be in the market of finding players that they can give extensions to so that they don't have to play the free agency game. I had a second point about it. I mentioned the 2 firsts in Filipowski. I do not think that would be the asking price for RJ Barrett. I'm saying like, man, a random idea of something that is a concept. Maybe it's 3 firsts. Maybe it's 3 firsts and a protected 4. I don't know. He's just a guy.
He is just a guy. I'm not saying. Yeah, I agree with you. I don't think he's someone who should cost the like 3, 4, 5 first type of thing. So
no, I was going to just throw out though. Let's just play would you wouldn't you? Yusuf Nurkic for matching salary. Their pick of Flip, Bryce, or Collier for a 1 young guy, and 1 first-round pick, not this year. So, like, say the Lakers pick. Would you do that?
100%. That's not even a question for me.
Dan?
Yeah, I think I probably would.
Okay. What about if
I might insist on the Jazz get to, like
okay.
Not Toronto's pick of those 3 guys, because I'm sure the Jazz already have an internal ranking of which of these 3 guys is most likely to be a rotation player on the next great Jazz team.
I probably worded that wrong. I just really meant one of those 3, and they have to figure out between them which one. Okay, what if it's the same Nurkic, one of those 3 guys, and 2 picks?
So now I'm getting in the era of probably, because it depends on like which picks are we talking about. Because again, Utah has so many picks, and it depends on the year, and it depends on if it's a Cleveland pick or a Minnesota swap or something like that. Like we have swaps and picks to trade. Like I think 2 tangible draft assets, and the player the Jazz and the Raptors agree is acceptable to give up on. And Nurkic, I think, is something that say like, yeah, we're building a real thing here. He's only, how old is he? 26, 27 right now. Like he fits exactly in
25.
The timeline. I'm sorry, he's 25.
Yeah.
So it's a cool idea to say, let's get Lowry Markkanen into the playoffs. Like we're done with all of this. We're ready to go. He's an immediate value. We need the creation skills for all of his flaws. We need what he has. This is way too much RJ Barrett talk. I would do it for 2 draft assets and a young player in Nurkic, and you could probably talk me into a 3rd bad draft asset.
See, I'm now getting into the point where I'm wincing at multiple draft assets, only because like I've never been super in love with Barrett. So for me, this is a little bit like when the John Collins opportunity came up and it was like free. Like the Jazz were able to just try out John Collins without sacrificing any real assets. Mm-hmm. And to me, a single pick and a single young guy and matching salary is close enough to that I can talk myself into it. Giving up a recent drafty and 2 picks. Now I'm like, now I have to like really believe in Barrett to do it, and I'd have to really think about if I believe in Barrett that much.
Okay. Well, I think we've found kind of the over under range among the three of us. I'm probably in the same place. One, I do. Two, I'd really have to think about it. So, and we should probably move on and quit talking about RJ Barrett to Mark's point. Like, there are other dudes in the league.
So give us one of your sexy names, Ken.
Well, I don't know if it's that sexy. It has been talked about quite a bit. Let me flip back to that screen because as soon as he said RJ Barrett, of course, just like you did, I had to flip over and start looking at RJ Barrett stats and salaries and ages and all sorts of things. A guy, this doesn't quite fit Mark's profile of under contract for another year, but under contractual control for another year. It's been talked about by several people. I don't know how realistic it is, but Tari Eason is a guy who I think the Jazz could make some inquiries about, try to go get low salary, easier to get on the salary side. You might have to take a salary back if they have anybody they're trying to get rid of. Nobody jumps out at, well, except for Fred VanVleet. But he's got money next year, so you probably don't do that.
Yeah.
So he's not under contract next year, but he is a restricted free agent. So then the team's got to look at, well, what are the odds we can keep him, and what is that number going to look like? I would think that he'd be somebody who'd maybe be a little more affordable than RJ Barrett. I don't know exactly where his numbers are going to land. He's a hell of a 3-point shooter this year, at least. And he, provides some things. He's mostly a bench guy, but he's a guy I've definitely looked at. And even to the point where, when thinking of their team needs, cough, point guard, is an Isaiah Collier and something, and maybe a draft asset, what you have to send to get Tari Eason back in the Jazz. 24 years old, 6'8", listed as a power forward. I hesitate to say he could play small forward, but that's kind of I just don't. I wish I had watched him a little more, but that's the guy that popped when Mark said come with some guys.
I like Tari Eason. Tari Eason was one of the guys on my sort of longer list. He's not at the top of my target range just because, like you said, that the Jazz would acquire his matching rights in restricted free agency, but you'd still have to negotiate with him this summer, and that complicates things a little bit. But I like that one a lot. I sort of forgot about this player. But as you were talking about Eason, it reminded me that like even Jabari Smith Jr. is a guy who I think the Jazz have been of the opinion in the past, at least, that Jabari Smith Jr. might be capable of a little bit more than what they're doing with him in Houston. I would talk to the Rockets about either of those players. Jabari Smith Jr. is under contract for a lot longer. They're similar in like macro value stats. I think Jabari Smith's he was a higher draft pick. He's probably got a little bit more star power, but I mean in terms of like win math, they grade out as similar players.
What I like about Jabari Smith is, to your point, he's already got his contract extension. And at the time he got his contract extension, the prevailing thought was, wow, that was an affordable contract extension for Jabari Smith. And I think people are a little bit overrating perhaps his potential and what he could cap out to be. I don't think he's going to become an all-star player. But I like the fact that you know what the salary is going to be, and you know that it's at least going to be acceptable for a starter, and which is what he is. Also, reunion with his college teammate Walker Kessler, which and those two guys are buddies, and that would be kind of cool. From Auburn University.
I'll give a guy. I have a couple of guard candidates, and it's hard to talk about the guard candidates without having a separate conversation we were going to have about Keontae George. We'll come back to that in a minute. Honestly, one of my top guys, one of my dream Jazz targets for a minute now has been, and I think his team is too good right now for this to be even remotely realistic in this cycle. But I've always just kind of kept an eye on Minnesota's situation with their salary crunch to figure out if there's ever a way that Jaden McDaniels becomes available. We're talking about an all-defense guy. So while he's not like an all-star in the sense of being an all-star, I mean, he can score a little bit. He can do some second-side attacking. I think they're using him more that way than they ever have before. But mostly you're getting him because he's like a floor raiser on the defensive end. He's kind of positionless. He can guard like 1 through 4. He can even guard certain 5s. So, can he play next to Lauri Markkanen? Hard yes. Can he play next to Keontae George? Of course he can. Can he play next to whoever the Jazz draft next with their 2026 draft pick? Yeah, he can. Like he's that versatile positionally. I've long felt he's someone that if Minnesota ever got to the point where they had to move a big salary, I would make sure I was at the front of that line. But I don't know that they can do it this year because I think they're back to really liking their chances at making another conference finals or maybe even going deeper.
And his improvement this year on some of those actually on-ball things is a big reason why they still are relevant towards the title discussion, whereas if he was the same player he was 2 or 3 years ago, they'd be more of an afterthought for the title conversation. And when I watch him, I'm surprised at how much he's dribbling. Sometimes I'm like, oh, I don't remember you dribbling this much.
Yeah.
He's doing a little bit more than I think we ever expected. He's long been a target of yours, Mr. Dan Clayton.
I like me some Jaden McDaniels. Give us a name, Mark. Let's go back around.
So this is going to be less of a name, but more of a concept, because I think this is just to your point about finding a Denny Avdia type of thing. I am just figuring out anything I can peel off the sinking ships of New Orleans and Sacramento. I am absolutely think that they are. I've never really felt this strongly before since the 2000s era of multiple mismanaged teams. I think you've got some real clown shows happening in Sacramento and New Orleans, and I want every part of picking up the phone. And
You're after Dario Saric, aren't you?
Oh yeah, for sure. But like I'm assuaging Joe Dumars that the Atlanta trade was a good trade for him. Like I'm really popping up his ego to think like you really know what you're doing. And I tell you what, man, like I know Trey Murphy is someone that gets talked about a lot, but like it's this isn't like sexy or interesting, but like if Nurkic gets offloaded somewhere else, like I think we've seen enough from Karlo Makovic this year to be like, hey, I could actually get him as like a backup center type of situation. Like I what does he have, like a team? I think it's a team option next year. Yes, right. I think I'm reading this correctly. Either way, like low level player.
Makovic is team option at the minimum next season.
Yeah, so it's like that's super low level. He's not. In some circumstances, he's not even a rotation player. But the Jazz they don't have actual centers, right? So like it's kind of been an issue for the Jazz this year. And if they're going to be competitive next year, if Walker misses time, we don't have Nurkic, we don't bring him back. Even if Kevin Love comes back for another year, I cannot watch Kevin Love playing actual minutes anymore. It's driving me a little nuts to watch him on defense. Makovic is young-ish, like he's 20. He's an older young guy as these things go. So it's a guy, and look, I don't think you're going to get Trey Murphy off of them. I think there's going to be bigger teams who are willing to pay more for a Trey Murphy. I think Herb Jones has had a very bad year, and he's getting up in his own age. So I'm not thrilled about Herb Jones, the player, but like maybe you can like he's still better than what we got at the power forward spot. So it's like, okay, I could play around with that idea. And
I like Herb. I think Herb's a player. I even like, since we're on the Pels, like Sadiq Bey missed all of last year due to injury, and then this year he's not shooting well, and so people are kind of trying to figure out if he's ever kind of going to get that back. But I like Sadiq Bey I used to like Sadiq Bey for a lot of the reasons why today I love Ken's idea of Tari Eason. Like I think you're right. I think there are some rateable players on these rosters.
And I'm not sure how I feel about it, and New Orleans is claiming absolutely not, don't even think about it. Derek Queen has looked amazing for New Orleans, and they have to be thinking about this Derek Queen, Zion Williamson situation. And I finally came to the conclusion this year that New Orleans is such a horribly run basketball organization. It's a football team with a basketball offshoot that the NBA has been deprived of what was supposed to be the real Zion Williamson. And if everyone's claiming Utah is this wonderful, perfect development organization as it is, like I don't think there's enough swig soda that can blow up his weight again, as opposed to what's in New Orleans, which is my favorite city in the world, by the way. I'd be tickled about the idea of proving to Zion that, like, hey, we're actually going to take care of you, and you will be a star here, and you're not being treated well in New Orleans. I'd be tickled about that. I think there are other teams who would be willing to pay more than Utah would, though. So I don't think we're in that conversation. So I'm only kind of like having happy feelings about it. Sacramento, I don't have any specific thoughts. I think they want to keep on Keegan Murray, and I'm not really interested in the rest of their crap. But
what about Keon Ellis?
He's just, I don't think he's notably better than what we have. I think they're horribly underusing him. Every Kings fan loves him. For some reason, the actual Kings do not love him. He fills a defensive role that we do not have in the backcourt right now, except for Elijah Harkless, who we'll see a lot more of the next 3 months. He's a guy I would be happy if the Jazz brought in. I'm not losing sleep over it, and if a second-round pick gets it done, I would absolutely bring him in. And I'm making sure that I have good relationships with those two teams to steal off whatever they're selling.
Ken, you got another juicy one for us?
I don't know that it's that juicy, but and I don't
I'm
even
really
know.
in a self-deprecating mode.
Well,
like
I also my self-assigned role in trade rumors is usually to shoot down all the reasons trades can't work. Yeah. It's like, well, that's a great idea, except, and then I write 3 paragraphs on why it can't happen for salary cap reasons, talent reasons, other reasons. So I'm not always that good at, I mean, anybody can do the math of a trade, but then coming up with things that actually make sense for both teams is generally harder, which is why most fan-created trade rumors are garbage. So let me add my bit of garbage to the heap.
The listeners loved hearing you say that.
Yeah. Well, if they've made it this far, they're not turning it off now. So, pre-agency move, again, not a guy under contract next year, but a guy who I think would be a tremendous fit on the Utah Jazz roster. Just not sure the Philadelphia 76ers are looking to move him on, but I wonder if there's a possibility the Jazz finally get their not reunited, but united for the first time with Quentin Grimes.
That's
pretty
juicy.
low salary,
That's
just under
very
$9
juicy.
million. What would? Yeah.
That's not unjuicy.
Okay. All right. I get it's not. It's not Giannis.
He would immediately become the Jazz third highest points per game player probably next year, unless Ace Bailey really improves.
Yeah. Or the lottery is finally good to the Utah Jazz and gives us a number 1, or yeah. But he does a lot of things well, and yet they're not in a real bind next year. They're well under the tax, although they're $22 million under the tax with quick counting 8 players. So they will quickly get in a bit of a bind if they want to re-sign everybody, but they can probably more easily let Kelly Oubre, Andre Drummond go, Kyle Lowry go. So, they probably have a way to bring him back, but he's unrestricted, and is that where he wants to be? He's not starting. He doesn't look like he'll be starting long term because you got Maxey, Edgecombe, and he's ahead of Jared McCain. So he's probably looking at a 6-man role. Is he ready for a change of scenery? He does, I believe, have the right to veto any trade this year. So he'd have to be on board, and he's not tradable until the 15th, which is almost here.
Is that an implied no trade clause issue?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
Because he signed his QO. Yeah. And also because he took the 1-year QO, the other complicating factor here is the Jazz wouldn't actually acquire his full bird rights in a trade. So you'd still have to figure out, and that's not prohibitive because the Jazz are going to have a crap load of cap space this summer.
Right.
But the Jazz would still have to figure out how to pay him with cap space next year, because you don't get his full bird rights when you acquire a player who waives the implicit no trade in that specific scenario.
Yeah. Okay, well, if that's
Um,
juicier than I thought,
but
then
I like Quentin Grimes. I mean, I think like what Quentin Grimes would be the blank best player on the Jazz's roster today. Both of you, I want to hear from you.
I pro- probably third, depending on where you put Walker
I
Kessler.
was just
But
gonna
it's hard
say,
to,
yeah, it depends
yeah.
on Walker. Like I'm immediately starting him, and I'm not thinking twice about it. So yeah, he'd be the third best player.
Yeah, and I think that's probably his role on a title team. I think on a contender, he's like your fourth best starter, maybe your fifth best starter. Like I don't find that idea unappealing at all. All right, I'll give you a couple of guard ideas, and then we'll quickly talk about the Keontae of this all. Um, I've said before, and it's now getting talked about more by national guys. Zach Lowe talked about it. The Hoop Collective guys have talked about it. Like at some point, Orlando has some decisions to make with money, and I think probably the way that's trending is that they wind up making a decision on Franz and Paolo and that pairing. But if they ever get to a point where they would listen to offers on Jalen Suggs, I'd be talking to them about Jalen Suggs, who I think is just, if he can ever stay healthy for long enough, I think he's one of those. I think he's like a Mike Conley type of guard who, if he's on your team, you just became X% more credible and professional. And for similar reasons, like at some point, the Spurs have to just stop collecting guards, right? And they have all these fun guards. De'Aaron Fox is playing at like a fringe all-star level this year. Dylan Harper has been impressive. Early Stephon Castle was the last rookie of the year. Like, what are they doing with Devin Vassell? And I do think Devin Vassell might have at a certain point in time gotten a little bit, like he was talked about as being underrated so much that he might have been slightly overrated for a minute in time. But he's on a contract. He's locked in on a long-term contract that is pretty affordable. It's 27. It stays flat. It actually goes down in the 27-28 season before going back to 27. So, like, again, if he's someone who's your fourth or fifth best starter or he's your sixth man, like mid-20s is fair for that type of a player. Not the world's best defender, but man, could the Jazz use some guys who are just lasers at shooting the basketball. And he's one of those guys who is a threat. Every defense knows where he's at every second he's on the floor. He's not just someone who like has a decent percentage because all of his shots are wide open catch and shoot. He is the guy that other teams are like, wait, like, do we have enough guys following Devin Vassell around, flare screens?
And
So
Utah,
those are a couple of,
except for Utah, who tends to leave him wide open all the
right,
time.
right.
Yeah.
So
Which
go ahead. No, please finish.
no. Well, I want to let you guys react to those names before we jump into, what might be the swan song for this podcast.
Well,
Forever or just this episode?
Well, we'll see how it goes.
I'll still go out on my own, Dan, with or without you. So the Jalen Suggs thing is an accelerated version of my RJ Barrett idea of like this team, like as great as Keontae George has played this year, and he clearly has actual ball handling chops. I liked again his discussion of where those passing chops came from with the Zach Lowe podcast, the interview that he did. I think it was a little bit more enlightening as to like he came in with at least a little something, and so I think it's worth building up, adding another guy to that though in the backcourt who can do that sort of thing. Jalen Suggs, by the way, out because he's injured, right? In Orlando, if they want to be a serious team right now, they probably want things to play right now to be a contender in the East because the East is wide open. So that would likely be a 3-team situation where the Jazz are giving up assets to somebody and the Orlando's getting some other piece that they can rely on, or Wendell Carter perhaps goes somewhere else and they get a massive improvement at center or something. Jalen, the money does not work, especially if Anthony Black is playing pretty decently. So that's an interesting way to go about it. And Devin Vassell, really like him, and I think San Antonio's kind of found something with these 3-point guards type of situations, but Vassell is. The money also doesn't work for the Spurs long term. It'll work for them right now and the next year, but they'll probably have a reason. And now that Keldon Johnson's money comes off the books, they might be a little bit more flexible. Love that idea. I have one more stupid idea to come out before we get into Keontae. And that's just, I think Boston is having a little bit of an identity crisis right now because they are so good with such a weird, bad team. And there's the specter of Jason Tatum coming back for the playoffs, which would make them suddenly an Eastern Conference, even if he's only playing 20 minutes a game, like get to the finals and see what happens, right? Who knows how battered and bruised the Western Conference winner will be, just kind of get there. And they look great right now. This is also a new ownership group who is looking at currently as it stands, a non-championship contending team who is paying the tax. And they're going to be trying to get off of players. This doesn't fully get them out of the tax, and he's had a down year, but I still like the idea of 28-year-old Sam Hauser as someone to really fill out the Jazz forward rotation. Good defender, fabulous shooter, having a down year, and he just signed an extension. I think it's a little rich, $10-11 million over the next 3 or 4 years, but that's not horrific money. Would be fine having a player like Sam Hauser in the rotation for the money he's making if Boston is really trying to get out of the tax.
He's also he figures into some scenarios that are like buy-sell opportunities. You could do a Yusuf Nurkic for Simons and Sam Hauser, completely get them out of the tax, and possibly pick up another asset along the way, which has been speculated here and there. Zach Lowe was talking about, not really pitching it, but just saying, if you traded Anthony Simons, does Yusuf Nurkic make them any better? Especially if they, on trade deadline day, think Jason Tatum is trending toward a return, they probably need to shore up because Keita's probably not a center they're going to ride to the finals.
Nurkic is such a funny player to me because we have seen happy Nurkic this year and the value he provides. He still does a lot of bad things out there sometimes. And I think if Boston was actually serious about improving the center spot, I think they'd rather be more satisfied with riding the Keita idea than going for a marginal upgrade. I think they would prefer an actual big upgrade, whereas Toronto on the flip side I think is more willing to be like, let's get a little better. They feel like let's get a little better team, whereas Boston would want to do something a little bit more impactful.
Yeah, but with it taking them completely out of the tax at the same time, I think they'd have to weigh that. Yes, I'm not trying to imply that Yusuf Nurkic does actually carry them to the finals, but that he's better. But that he has a better chance of contributing along the road in the playoffs, and he saves them bazillions of dollars in tax payments.
Yeah.
So between the two things.
And by the way, the Jazz already employed Sam's brother Joey Hauser briefly on a two-way? It was a two-way something.
Two-way, and I think he was signed early in the offseason and released before the season started. So
yeah. People definitely came here for the Joey Hauser content, so I'm just glad I could bring that up. Nurk, real fast on Nurk, which again, not why you're here, fine folks of the internet. I was actually pretty bearish on Nurk early, mostly because he wasn't putting any pressure on the rim, and I think that's important out of a modern pick and roll center. And then either someone talked to him about that, or he read SaltCityHoops.com, or so. Now he's like making more of an effort to actually take the floaters that he gets in pick and roll. And now that that's happening, I actually think he's making the Jazz offense make sense in a way that, Mark, you've talked about this a lot. Like, if you want to develop young players, they have to play on a basketball team that resembles an NBA basketball team. So anyway, just wanted to say that about Nurk before we left Nurk. The Keontae conversation is just this, and we can each kind of chime in on this, but I didn't want to tease it for a half hour and then not get there. I think it's funny. Last year, this time, I think Key was probably, depending on who you talked to, he might have even been one of these candidates for like, hey, should the Jazz just move off him and like try again and generate another first round pick because I don't know if it's coming together. Then there was a portion in the early season when he's like, oh, he's kind of interesting. He might actually be a trade asset now. And I will admit that I personally, in November, early December, mid-December, maybe even, I was thinking like, hey, I don't want to say it too loudly, but like actually Keontae George playing this way makes it more likely that he's part of the Jazz's next big trade, their next big buyer trade that they're going to use to really put their next core in place. Now, I mean, the longer that this unbelievable shooting continues, the unbelievable clutch play, the number of games that he just looks completely under control, which was not something we used to say about Keontae George. Mark, you in the last podcast talked about his 7 assist, 0 turnover game. Like, the more that happens, it now is kind of starting to feel like, man, it would, like, they just might not be able to trade him. Like, he might just be not like actually off limits, because very few NBA players are off limits, but functionally off limits in the sense of like, could they really get off of a development project that has become this much of a success almost overnight? And I think he deserves a lot of credit for that. And it's why I've sort of cooled my jets on like the Jalen Suggs and Devin Vassell. Devin Vassell's a different player. He's not really a point guard, but it does certainly change the threshold on like a Jalen Suggs type idea or other guard ideas. And, to Keontae's credit, it's kind of wild considering where we were 365 days ago that now he feels like, Jesus, like, is he a core piece?
Ken, I'm most curious on your thoughts because I don't think I know your Keontae George ideas. I mean, everyone has positive vibes around Keontae George these days, but thinking about the Jazz going forward, I haven't heard from you on your George thoughts.
Sorry, was that me?
I was leading the witness.
What he's saying is he's heard me ramble about Keontae George playing.
Okay, all right. I'm almost exactly in the same thing. I mean, we share 57% of our DNA according to DNA testing, and we share our thoughts on this. In fact, I don't know if Dan specifically remembered this conversation. I've been in Utah something like 20 times in the last year because of our personal family reasons. And I believe it was the time I was there very briefly at the start of December when we had this conversation. And I didn't know that Dan already thought this, but I brought up the same thing to him, which was, nobody wants to know this. In fact, I tweeted it one night in November and it got no traction at all. I said, everybody talks about trading Lowry, because at that point that was still, in Zach Lowe's mouth every time he opened it. And everybody talks about trading Lowry, but, at this point, do you maybe sell high on what Keontae is doing? And we talked about that. I believe that when I was there on December 4th and 5th. And then I wasn't up there again until Christmas. And I'm with what Dan said. I mean, at this point, it's like that might end up being franchise malpractice if you traded him at this point, and he continued to grow. It would be, I mean, you would have to get nobody's untouchable, but you would have to really get something that just really panned out for you. Because if Keontae continues to grow like he's done, like this jump he's taken this year, continues to play like that, you'd end up with egg on your face. It was interesting. I was listening. This was probably 3 or 4 weeks ago now. But Tony Jones of The Athletic was on Jackpotting Around with Chad and Art, who participated in a group post that I put together a while back. And he went through and said that the odds of trading 4 different players in the league had changed because of Keontae George's growth. For example, he said before, like in the offseason, he said there was maybe a 50% chance the Jazz might look at a Trae Young trade. Now with Keontae's growth, it's down to 10%. Darius Garland, 60%, down to 20%. Austin Reeves, 95% that they would look at that, now maybe down to 63%. Now he's just picking these numbers out of the air, but in every case, he's saying Keontae's growth and the role he's playing is making it less likely that they have to go outside to find a guy that does that. So
I actually really want to imagine Tony Jones sitting there with like a really advanced calculator that like
never happened.
That can come up with like really, you can put like probabilistic things in it, and it gives you, it can weigh really ethereal conceptual things.
Never happened. In fact, when he was spitting out some of these numbers, and we love Tony. This, if anybody thinks we're picking on Tony, that's not the case. If as he was spitting out some of these numbers, Chad and Art were kind of laughing in the background and saying, "Oh, 63. 63 was the first number he gave that didn't end in a 0 or a 5." So he was like branching into as if these were really actually calculated numbers, and they were kind of having a good laugh at that.
I'm also imagining it's like Price is Right, and like Austin Reeves is trotted out while everyone's on contestants row, and they're offering bids, and Tony Jones is like 63%, and he ends up getting the winning bid. What's to anyone who's thinking like how is Salt City Hoops talking about trading Keontae right now? And I think it's just more of like a reality of what I was saying earlier, of like we just can't get too attached to these guys at certain points. And again, to his credit, he's gotten so good that he only makes sense in an FU trade. And the reason it's not going to happen is for two reasons. One, Utah is in no position right now to make an FU trade. Like that will come this offseason. And I think this is a conversation worth having again, is like, what type of players are out there that you'd say like, yeah, you know what, Keontae George is on the table for that, right? And there's going to be intriguing conversations about it because of his amazing year this year, but is still not perfect. And so you're wondering, okay, what is the shape of the next Jazz championship team? I'm sitting here hoping he doesn't. Like I'm so enamored with Keontae. I do not want to see him trade. I want to see where this thing goes, and I want to ride this train as it's happening. You're seeing the age 22 Keontae versus age 22 Donovan Mitchell, and I'm like, did I name my oldest son off after the wrong guy? But and then the second part of that is there are no players in this trade cycle that make any sort of sense for the Jazz. Like the Giannis to Utah makes 0 sense, right? Or any other star like an Anthony Davis or such like that. So there's no construct where, unless there's a Luka Doncic last year-esque trade where it's like that we didn't know this guy was on the block, this makes no sense, and Keontae gets traded for that. It's just more people who listen to this should take a firm hold as to the rapidity of his ascension, is to say, like, 4 months ago, this was a nothing player. And so what do you do with this player? And right now I think everyone is on board with, we have to ride it out and see what happens, because he's been that good. But yeah, as recently as December, it was, what kind of topsy-turvy trades are out there for something like Keontae? But for now, I'm just happy watching him play, and every single game he does something that he improves upon from something that he screwed up in the last game. His resilience from bad games is, I don't know where that came from, because he was not a resilient player before. So he's been a joy. Don't let our discussions about his trading imply that we don't like the guy.
No, I think for a long time, most of our assumptions about how the Jazz would build their next title core is that it would come down to something like Lowry, hopefully an Ace Bailey is as good as you project him to be. The Jazz draft one more stud in the 2026 draft, and then at some point they make that FU trade. They make that trade for like a core piece for a star or a near star. And because that's been the operating assumption for so long, I think it was easy to go, whenever they make that trade, they're going to have to put some good players in that trade. You don't go get whoever the equivalent is of Giannis, because I agree the Jazz aren't trading for Giannis. But if next year Franz Wagner is available and the Jazz are cobbling together a Franz Wagner package, you can't just give your spare parts that you don't want and then a bunch of picks. You have to also give them interesting things that they care about. And so it was just easy to go like, hey, if that's the next step, if that's the step that the Angels are going to take at some point, then yeah, maybe Keontae has played his way into being an asset in that deal. But now I think what we're saying is actually that maybe Keontae has rendered that whole conversation moot, because now maybe the new version of the Jazz of the Core features Keontae in a way that we didn't really see as very likely or even possible 6 months ago.
I thought it was, Lowe asked him, hey, has everyone talked to you about that you're the next Stockton and Malone with Lowry Markkanen? And man, this is the next stage, Darren Williams and Carlos Boozer that we got. Like this is a playoff team with those two guys. Let's build around him and see where it goes from there.
That's a good place to end. We'll wrap this baby up. Just quickly, any final thoughts? Any final goodbyes? We'll go in, I guess, ascending order of beauty. No, I'm just kidding. I don't know what order we'll go. We'll go in the order I can see you guys on my screen. Ken, your farewell for the evening.
Not much to add, really. Just looking forward to 23 more days until the trade deadline. And it's always, we watch basketball to watch basketball, and the game putting the spherical object through the hoop. But I love the transaction cycles because it's just this time of speculation and prognostication and hope, especially in a season that's in the last few seasons that have been not as exciting always on the court. So while it's secondary to actually watching the athletic competition, I love the transaction cycle. So this is one of my 2 times a year where they're at their peak. So you know where you'll find me is scrolling, updating Twitter and Blue Sky and other news feeds way too many times all day long.
Mark Pereira.
I've said it multiple times, and I think on this particular episode, it's worth highlighting to conclude as you're closing out the podcast feed or what have you. I'm so thankful we have a management team that has relationships with the other 29 organizations and is always picking up the phone and coming up with weird ways to insert themselves in transactions. Kyle Anderson is the most likely player to get traded. We even mentioned who's most likely, who's least likely. There's going to be Utah is going to be involved in trades, and we have smart people behind how to organize the cap and how to make the trades and everything. So I am never, ever, ever worried that this team is not working. Even if they make decisions we don't disagree with, there are teams that do not work, that do not put the level of effort in or do not have the intelligence to make it work. So we got a good management team that I trust to at least try.
All right. That was Mark Pereira. That's Ken Clayton over there. I'm Dan Clayton. This has been another Salt City Hoops podcast, and we'll keep the content flying your way during this trade deadline season and throughout the Jazz's year. Thank you. This has been a Salt City Hoops podcast.